Okay, so I think we're going to get started. Let's bring on our next two speakers. Great. So we have with us Jason Malacko and Chris Howden. Welcome to the SOC Masterclass, and thank you again for joining. Jason is a director and an architecture security strategic solutions. I'm not sure what that is, but I'm sure we're going to get a lot of his knowledge as an SME in this space. And Chris Howden is a threat analyst, an analysis team leader. So welcome to the SOC Masterclass. I'm not sure if you were able to join us for the previous session, but a lot of acronyms came up. Oh, what's 1 second? Yeah, there you go. And what we're going to try and do is kind of debunk or demystify some of these acronyms to try and understand really what they're about and how they differ, so that it'll give you, in some ways, the tools to be able to ask the right questions. So before we get going, as we have done in the past session, we're going to do a quick polling question. Also, for those who perhaps are joining who were not in the first session, if you do have any questions, please hit the Q&A button down below the video, and you'll see you'll be able to submit a question. So let's just do a quick polling question. 1 second. Okay. So let's just launch that, and I'm gonna read it out. And really, these polling questions are kind of designed to help us with the discussion and to get the opinion of people. So, do you believe that a managed service provider should be able to manage any product category? So, products change all the time, but the concepts remain the same. Second. Enterprise security technologies are like commercial airplanes. Each require a wide variety of skills and expertise. Hopefully you can read that. Some of the answers here are long. Service providers support a narrow set of products so they can effectively use the same human resources. And the final one is product categories. I expect my provider to do everything. I only care about the outcome. So this is a kind of a kickoff polling question. You can spend a moment thinking about which statement you agree with most. You don't have to be working with a security provider to have an opinion. So please jump in there. We'll keep it going for an extra minute because I want to reach more than 50% of the audience. So we will let people have a think about that. Okay. All right. So let's stop that there, and I'm gonna share the results. Okay. So looks like the second answer, enterprise security technologies are like commercial airplanes. They're all different, right? They may all be airplanes, but they require specialist skills. So, Jason, what's your feeling around these answers? Oh, are you on mute?
Yeah, it would help if I unmuted myself. Apologies. So yeah, I'm sure we've all done that before. So yeah, looking at the polling results, I'm seeing exactly what I'd like to see. I'm majority of the audience is voting for that enterprise security technologies are a lot like commercial airplanes, right? Requiring individual as well as organizational certifications and knowledge. So, okay. And these are very widely accepted different philosophies, but this is very much in alignment with my beliefs and what I think is important. So, yeah, Chris, do you have an opinion as well on
Yeah, so I was really interested in the second highest view as well. So I actually think to a degree that there's probably some readily transferable concepts, right? In some products, right? So you can see the same ideas happening in different types of technology as well. That's definitely something.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think you could certainly, once you've learned, for instance, one endpoint technology, the concepts are quite applicable and similar, so you could learn it faster, but there's still a learning curve. I think we would agree, correct?
Yeah, yeah, 100%. Yeah, same with the firewall, same with the WAF.
Yeah. And there are. I was a little bit surprised by the product the one that the third most, which was some people just want an outcome. They don't really care about the technology. It's just they deliver the outcome, we'll install whatever. Well, whatever technology you dictate, we'll just you just deal with it. I honestly expected that to come out last, but it came out third. So
okay. All right, so that's a good segue. And like I said, one of our objectives for this session was to kind of give much more more of a spotlight under the different types of technologies and services that are available and how they have evolved. So perhaps let's take a zoom out for a couple of minutes and try and understand kind of this evolution of how security services have changed over time. Jason, do you want to give us a view on that?
Absolutely. So fundamentally, I think what we want to think about is definitions. And for me, that's part and parcel of what we're doing here. But you can make assumptions and apply perfect logic and get to a perfectly valid conclusion. But if your assumptions are wrong, your conclusions are wrong. And I would submit to the audience that, services providers want to improve security. I think we know that and have had direct experience that that's not always improving with expectations. But I would submit to the audience that sometimes often things the same way, and are you shooting at the same target? And let me give you an example. One of the terms that we're going to talk about today is managed detection and response, or MDR. It's a term that's been around for a long time, but what does that term really mean, and what is that response? And if you were to ask a service provider what is a response, do they provide a response? And then their answer could be yes. If you or ask about that definition, the response could be, a recommendation. We're going to recommend what you ought to do. Or the response might be, ultimately some sort of automation, for instance, to lock out Active Directory and preclude a user from logging in, sort of thing. So the point that I want to get into, and we'll dig into more here, is that all service providers really want to improve security, but we really want to get into the what's and the whys and the hows of how they do it, and make sure that we're not making different assumptions that lead us to the correct conclusion, but ultimately might result in us hitting a different target. And so to that end, just kind of zooming out a bit, let's talk about what the market looks like, and from a timeline perspective. And let me just bring some definitions to some of these terms at a broad overview level, and then we'll get into more detail. So basically, from my perspective, the industry started out in security services with this term called MSSP, the Managed Security Services Provider, as an offshoot of providers. So managed service providers, provided all sorts of services around anything IT. Obviously, security came into play, and more security capabilities, very much started there. And we'll talk about that more. All right. So fundamentally, I think I was just talking about MSSP, talking about MDR providers are becoming more detection focused, right? And MSSPs were prior to that were very alert centric. They had become very much become in the industry often associated. MSSP kind of to many became a dirty word. Hopefully you got all that part, and that MD response. And Gartner, back in 2016, had produced a market report that they called Managed Detection and Response. And they've since, provided a number of updates to that. But at the end of the day, that coin term MDR has stuck around, and it really set off, a revolution around this managed security services market being very, very high fidelity detection and having, response actions, being able to have attributes like threat hunting and things of that nature. So this broad category of MDR very much focused. And then, a number of other terms started rapidly coming out in other subcategories of MDR. Some of the more notable ones, for instance, would be managed endpoint detection and response, or MEDR. Another was managed network and detection and response. So you kind of get this asterisk DR. There's many more of those, but these are the most predominant ones. Another example might be cloud detection and response, but this really represents this evolution of really focusing on detection and response from a number of different perspectives.
Like we're having a bad network day. Jason?
Obviously, there's challenges that you can't just install an endpoint on everything. So then this
keep going. It's okay.
I'm giving an error if it's not good. But then managed network detection and response, looking at it from the network perspective, and where we've moved. I think we've have a SOC Masterclass talking about XDR as a product category, right? How do we move beyond endpoint and bring in network and contextualize and all this sorts of information. And so we'll talk about that more going on, but I'm trying to just zoom out. And what the industry has done in adopting is putting this M for managed in front of a product category, XDR. And of course, there's a difference between what the products do and what the services do. But that's where we're at today, and managed extended detection response, or MxDR, has a variety of different approaches, as XDR does, which we'll talk about. And then where we're really at emerging for the largest of enterprises is how do we bring in all of these elements, not just MxDR. These enterprises have a substantial investment in SIEM, the security information event management and security orchestration, automation, response platforms. So how do we take all of that together and even do interesting things like hybrid delivery options? And so ultimately, I'm just giving you a high-level view of how how the market has kind of transformed. The most common terms that are used for detection and response services, and the sophistication just continues to rise. From not just from a technology perspective, but the skills that you need to drive and operate those technologies and the processes and the peoples around that. So with that, I think I'm going to segue over here. So I just want to see, Chris, maybe you can take us through how you see the role of MSSP has evolved as contrasted to the super category of managed detection and response.
Yeah, so there's definitely some similarities, right? So there's definitely some similarities. So you think about that Venn diagram. There's some things that will always sit in the middle of those things, of those two concepts. You've got 24/7 monitoring, a platform to manage log data, but where we're moving to now with NDR, right, is more about the detection and the response, right? And an MSSP is going to sit there, and it may manage something, a firewall, it may manage a gateway, but the focus is now switching to that respond as well, like that extra element. So we're now much higher fidelity in our threat detection. It's much more focused, perhaps around the customer. There's an opportunity to go and think about a particular threat relative to that customer or that industry vertical, right? And then actually thinking about containing, right? So if we have a breach and we're managing for a customer, right? can we contain, like, can we isolate, like, as part of that incident investigation as well. So it's not just you have a problem, but you have a problem and we've isolated it as well.
Chris, do you think that there are some MSSPs that are just throwing on the term MDR, claiming to be an MDR provider and not necessarily actually an MDR provider? They're just an MSSP using that term?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, definitely. I mean, it's certainly something that's happening. It is that ability to respond, right? It's to be able to understand the customer and what needs to happen next as well, right? So not just exactly that.
So maybe with that, we should start to talk about what MDR is, not just, obviously we're experts and we're talking about that, but maybe we should take a view at what a number of the major industry analysts view is as well as a point of dialogue.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's Forrester, right? And if you think about Forrester and what Forrester think about, and then also what Gartner think about, and IDC, and there are some some similarities that get pulled out of these. They all talk about threat hunting, right? It's a commonality. They all talk about analytics of some sort, but the importance of those things are the view may be slightly different. And they're not necessarily right. Definitely not. But today they are becoming much more important. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So as an example, definitions matter. If somebody claims to be an MDR or managed detection response provider, and they don't provide threat hunting as an example, definitionally, they're not really an MDR provider, right? I mean, you can provide a managed security service, but it's not. This is not just marketing or hype. I think we have a consensus at this point in the industry of what MDR is. Not just Chris and Jason as experts' opinions, what the industry analysts think, what some of other vendors in this space. So yeah, I could. That's something to me that's very, very, very near and dear. So threat. When you talk about MDR in particular. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about the importance of threat intelligence, right? A number of MSSPs often come from a pedigree of infrastructure, and the difference of the specialists that you see perhaps in a traditional MSSP are more engineers, more IT oriented, right? They might have speeds and feeds of threat intelligence, right? That they get within their product, but the importance, I know that's very near and dear to you, Chris, that threat intelligence is, business relevant, actionable, indicating next steps. Maybe some comments from you on where you see threat intelligence and MDR providers and how important that is.
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting point as well. I mean, if you think about threat intelligence from an MDR provider, and perhaps I've spoken very briefly before about this concept of collecting threat intelligence internally as well. If you've got threat intelligence collecting from perhaps an MDR provider, you've got a much more holistic view, right? Not necessarily the single industry vertical. Right? So we're collecting intelligence about the banking industry, for example. We're actually collecting interesting, actionable intelligence that's affecting multiple industries as well, right? Yeah.
And that's something you certainly wouldn't get from a traditional MSSP or an MSSP that just stamped the name MDR on their team. These are important distinctions, most certainly. Okay, so
maybe before we dive into to XDR and how that's changing the landscape, and in the previous session Ali had from Forrester had an opinion. Let's ask another polling question. Okay, so how important is it for your organization to maintain its data and threat detection rules within a tenant versus the service provider? So first response is this isn't negotiable. Data is ours, even if the service contract is terminated. The second is we're fine for the service provider hosting our data, provided we can acquire the platform and take the data with us. Third is we want lower costs, so we accept the use of a commercial shared platform, provided we can acquire the platform after. And the fourth is we're fine using anything from the service provider. If we move to a new vendor, we'll start over again. So what's people's opinion on the issue of being able to maintain who owns the data, where is the data, and what happens in the long term? Let's give a few minutes for people to answer. Chris, what do you reckon would be the highest selection? What, in your experience, talking with customers?
I don't want to influence the poll, but I think the first one. I think customers' data it's theirs. Right? It's definitely theirs.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, Jason, what do you think?
Well, that's very much a cyber-proof thinking, right? The detection logic, all that intellectual property. Yes, that's the one I would expect. I'm very interested to hear.
Sure. Okay, 5 more seconds. Anyone else want to give an opinion? Who owns data? Who owns, workflows? Yeah,
it's, to be clear, it's the data, all the threat logic, all of that, right? It's your property, or is it the provider?
All right, let's show the results, and looks like you certainly with this audience agreeing with both of you.
Yeah, wow. It did, but there are answers for all the polling questions, right? There are people who are willing to accept all of that. So that just shows that there is a diversity of views and people willing to look at things differently, right? And while the panelists here have a strong opinion on the first one, obviously there are different views. So okay. I think that also has to do with the size of the organization, right? As you start to move up into, let's call it Fortune 500 sorts of space, the larger the organization, I think the less negotiable this is, the lower there are trade-offs, right? As you start to do these sorts of things. And larger organizations tend to, of course, run their own operations and always use a provider as an extension of their team, and they see it as very malleable. Much like I would use an analogy of an internet service provider, right? They can trade out internet service providers however they want and they see fit at the time. But that doesn't. But other entities who are more smaller, that don't have these sorts of specialists and expertise, they're going to be limited and not be able to trade these things out in such a flexible manner. So that does make sense.
Okay, thank you. So we're kind of segueing into the XDR space, and I thought maybe Chris, you could take us through this. XDR was mentioned, as I said. It looks like it's a new security stack. Ali thinks it's very much a replacement for EDR. What's your take? And maybe you could take us through the main functionality and what new comes with XDR.
Yeah, I think the most important word in there is the X, or the letter is the X, right? And it's extended, right? So it's now not just your endpoint data, right? It's all of the other additional pieces that we can also bring to the party, really. And it's those non-traditional ones as well, those non-traditional data sources that we wouldn't perhaps necessarily think about, or an MSSP would think about, and that can augment, that can allow us to give a different view of the data, and definitely some I'll say some non-traditional ones. I mean, we think about the IoT space, we think about the operational technology spaces, things like SCADA and bringing that kind of information out and into an XDR type solution. It's very much a much larger pot, and so first and foremost of data, but it's also the additional capabilities over the top as well. Without wanting to be focused on a particular set of vendors or something like that, but it's the additional capability over the top of that. So things like digital loss prevention, so actually being able to mark what's important to you and being able to identify it, right? And understanding also what's going inside our network in terms of MDR and network detection and response. And then starting to think about those workloads we've got in the cloud, right? So you workloads and who's accessing them as well, and when they can access them and why they can access them, and understanding that kind of capability as well. So yeah, it's kind of two elements for XDR. It's the front end pieces, so the things that people actually see and touch and feel, and then it's also the elements that sit under that stack. So cloud native, cloud delivered, like a much larger data set. Some opportunity for automations and orchestrations, and orchestration being a set of automations, supplementing it with threat intelligence and the much more complex analytics, maybe even across multiple data sets. Right? So if we're looking at our OT data and then our Active Directory data, for example, all those kind of things, and then just being able to really well define our response as well, right, and understanding the process that needs to be stepped through for our response, and what the workflow looks for that as well. So triggering those automations and orchestrations.
Yeah, another thing I'd kind of point out that's shared in common amongst Forrester and Gartner is that they both talk about cloud, right? Being cloud delivered, or as input as a cloud. It's like we just accept cloud nowadays. So as many legacy architectures still have many on-premise capabilities. We at Cyberproof, I think we have a masterclass session about this, talking about the difference between cloud provision versus cloud delivered, right? Or cloud native, excuse me. Cloud provision versus cloud native are very, very different. And so it's a little bit sneaky when you're thinking about XDR, that we can almost talk about it, all these little things, and not even think about cloud. But by definition, these cloud capabilities and having native capabilities in XDR are crucial, right? And it really is. I just look at all these acronyms down here. What an acronym soup of different inputs. So really, Chris, when you said the X is about anything, wow, I mean, how many more acronyms can we throw at this? But that's really is the inputs to that before we can get to a managed service.
Yeah, and it means different things to different people as well, right, Jason? Right, we say that. That's it's when you go and talk to one customer, what XDR looks like, right, and go and talk to another customer, it's two very different things, and that can also apply in the same industry vertical as well, right? So you go and talk to two organizations in the same industry vertical, they may have two completely different ways of working, right? And their problem, but the problem that they're trying to solve is going to be different as well. So it's
to your point. So then when you're talking to an MxDR provider, somebody who's going to manage this XDR, the philosophy of the provider, you need to make sure that you're aligned, right? Some entities are looking at XDR. Notice in the acronym soup up here, you don't see the word SIEM, S-I-E-M. SIEM or SIEM, depending on where in the world you are, pronounced different. Security Information Event Management. And so for some, they believe that they want to build a security architecture that doesn't have a SIEM at all. SIEM-less, if you will, is XDR. And others, to your point, Chris, feel that SIM is here to stay. It will never go away. And, that should be, XDR should contextualize EDR and work together with SIM. So I think that's a great point, Chris. The different perspectives are not, you can come, they're not contradictory, they're not contradictory. They're just different perspectives on how you approach this. So making sure that you're aligned, your assumptions when you're hearing these acronyms, that you're talking to your provider about what do they mean and clarify, most certainly.
And what's important.
Okay. So something that we often talk about, and some people use slightly different combinations of this, but this idea of let's turn this into how do we make sense out of the outcomes? And one way of looking at it is what are we trying to do? What are we trying to solve when it comes to platform, process, and people, or technology, process, and people? So maybe Jason, perhaps you could take us through your thinking around the platform. What is the impact of the platform on overall services, and what enterprises would expect from a platform offering.
Yeah, so as you think about the platform of the technology, if you will, of any service provider, there's a number of things that you have to ask yourself, right? I mean, there are a number of platforms that are out there that are well known. They're commercial. You can buy them off the shelf. They're very customizable. There are service providers out there that have a proprietary platform that they're the only ones that can use it. You can't buy it as a product and take it anywhere. You can only use it with their service. There are providers that use open source technology that is clearly modifiable, and in that instance, they might have some of their own customizations, but they're committing to give you all the code. In which case, you might have the tremendous expertise to be able to change that code and work through the outcome. And of course, there's always variations or hybrids thereof. And so as I think about the platforms, the questions that start to go through my mind on the impact are really kind of to the polling questions that we asked earlier, that most of our audience agreed with, is, look, where do these security analytics reside, and how transparent can you be? Because one of the things that MSSPs have gotten a black eye over is being a bit of a black box and not knowing what's going on within them. So if you are using, for instance, a commercial solution that's off the shelf, can you look at those analytic rules that your provider has put in? Maybe you don't have the expertise to develop them all, but can you at least look at them, have some transparency, and then can you take those analytics rules with you? Or is the provider going to do something like, I've seen this before, where they might use a commercial platform that they host on your behalf, and what they say is all of this is their intellectual property that they developed over the cycle of the contract with you, but then you can't take it with you. And when you typically are working with a service provider, these are frequently multi-year contracts, sometimes 3 to 5 years, right? And you develop this enormous amount of intellectual property with them. To say that you can't take this with you is, from my perspective, and clearly a majority of our audience, it's a tough pill to swallow. And so I think that's very, very important. I was talking a little bit about obviously cloud provisioned versus cloud native. And we didn't talk a whole lot about security data lakes and these sorts of things, but where does this platform live? I mean, we kind of just assume the cloud is there today, but I wouldn't assume that. I would ask your provider, or your own architecture with respect to the platform, where is it? Is it a hybrid cloud, or this polycloud term, right? I mean, how does that work, and how are the native components supported, and going to give you the visibility that you need, because cloud is a foregone conclusion, right? And really, how does that platform integrate with all of your threat intelligence, right? As I said, I'm often like to say that, I get really frustrated when people describe threat intelligence as just some kind of feed, right? I want to know how it's business actionable and how it's relevant to my business that'll tell me what I can do next. And how is the platform going to support that? These are in my mind, terribly important questions about the platform that need to be answered and clearly understood and defined before you're, especially not just if you're running your own security operations center, but most certainly if you're hiring a service provider, and if you're even willing to entertain the concept, which I would submit to you should, of working in a hybrid fashion of doing multiple things with a service provider with respect to not just your platform, but I think that's a good move into talking about people. And so with that respect, when people think about outsourced services, I would just encourage the audience to think about everything is not all or nothing. Even the graphic design we have on the screen here showing completely internal, completely outsourced with hybrid being in the middle still isn't even, as accurate as I'd like to be, meaning this could be 25% internal or 75% internal. There is this range of motion that could certainly take place. But what's important to be able to create these hybrid options with people is that transparent view, right? Starting with the platform, starting with collaboration and capabilities with the service provider. If they can't be transparent to you, this is obviously unachievable. But I would submit to you that there are these sorts of providers out there that absolutely will be transparent. And kind of to the right, obviously there are a number of roles, and when you look at a SOC, the people that are there, these are just some of the roles. And this is not a, one guy does it all shop at an enterprise. There are a number of different expertises. And so not only do you need to think in terms of, can you get economies of scale, right? So what I often hear from clients is, for instance, we have a SOC, we have threat intelligence, we have an enormous amount of information, but you as a service provider have many more clients and a much more wider view of things, and we want to gain that intelligence. But maybe they feel the threat intelligence team is really good and got a great handle on premise, but is struggling with cloud. So the point that I'm trying to make is you don't need to take this threat intelligence analyst and just say all or nothing. It's going to be outsourced to a provider, and that's that. There's very hybrid fashion there. And the same goes for really all of these roles. It's very, very common to have all kinds of outcomes. Like, for instance, a common outcome is a follow the sun. Maybe, you're an organization that obviously needs protection 24/7, but, your business hours and your locale makes it different to staff, from, the third shift. So maybe you want to consider a time-based sort of scenario whereby your SOC is covered by your provider on a time basis. And security analysts also, while I only have one definition here, normally in any sizable SOC has these things called tiers or levels. And so, for instance, at level 1, they might just do triage, or at level 2, they do containment activities. So you might want to say, I'm going to have, I'm going to go through a hybrid option because I have this visibility, I have metrics that matter, and I can measure it, and therefore I can manage it. And I'm willing to work with a provider who's going to provide all the L1, services, SOC analyst, security analyst services, and then, take on higher tiers within your own organization. But that really applies to all these roles could be done in that fashion. So really the thinking process here is just to make sure that we're thinking through our provider, that we don't think of it as all or nothing, and that as we think through the lens of people, there's a tremendous amount of skills. If you're doing something like in a component of network detection and response, there are a lot of security expertise that's needed for that to configure all these elements, and the staff to do that are quite extensive. And so maybe you have that staff, or maybe you need to outsource that, but just all the different areas of people. Anything you'd add to that, Chris?
Yeah, I think there's a point really here is that you can complement, like, I think the word is perhaps complement, like, often. You've got some really good skills, perhaps in your current organization, and they've got a level of technical understanding about the tools and systems that are actually there already. But you just need it to complement. And we'll go back to that point of threat intelligence, right? And we talked about that, that concept of verticals, and looking across different verticals. Somebody being specialized in a certain area, right, will complement what you've got there already.
Yeah, really being an extension to the team.
Yeah,
absolutely. So let's move on to looking at this through a process perspective. How do the not just the platform and the people, but how does the process play here?
Yeah. I mean, 100%. I mean, from my point of view, I often will argue that process is probably the most important thing. And some people may have a slightly different view, but if we understand the process and the things that we need to do and the order that we need to do them, and what happened before and what happens next, and the steps that we need to take to perform something inside the SOC, perhaps the way that we respond to a bad thing happening, right, is it's really important, because you can train somebody to understand a process, right, and you can apply a process to multiple technologies and multiple platforms. So I can I will certainly present that argument, and I'll often present that argument. And the other point really here is you simply cannot automate something that you don't understand initially, right, and you can't automate it, you can't orchestrate it if you can't write it down, right? So if you can't document that thing and your ways of working, or the steps that you're taking, then forget the rest of it. Right? Completely forget the rest of it. So it's that it is very much for me definitely a process-driven thing. And and then the other element of this one is really once you've got your process, process, then how far can we go with automation? How far can we go with the orchestration of those set of automations as well? And then the other thing as well here is when we think about those processes for a particular organization, and our ability to respond, but we also have to think about the detection element of this as well, right? So what are we doing for a particular organization? Is it a one size fits all thing that where we're getting a set of analytics where they're unique to us, or it's a standard set of analytics based on a particular data source, as an example, or some combination of the two as well. So it's it's a kind of a multifaceted problem, right, in terms of process as well, right, and what we do and what's important.
Yeah, what is your view, Chris, on enterprise processes as it relates to threat analytics, in the sense of some providers would say, don't worry about that. We create the outcome. We will cover all that for you. We ultimately make it for all of our customers, and that's robust. That process is robust for all customers. Do you think that can be made into one size fits all for enterprise?
I think it's very difficult. We've touched on this already, right? So two organizations in the same vertical work very, very differently. You take two insurance companies and they work very, very differently. You take two banking institutions and they'll work very, very, very differently. Multiple technologies, multiple. It can even be down to where those people are located in the world as well, and their local customs and behaviours. It's all of these things that so I think there's a degree of transfer, stuff that we can transfer here, and we can transfer across. But we have to be sympathetic to the organisation that we're working with, and transparent. We keep going back to that word, transparent. Right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, we actually have a question that's come in. So before before that slide, you want to cover that slide, Jason. So actually, it comes back to kind of, I think I'm seeing that, the challenge of kind of making making a move to a different kind of technology. But here, here's the question: can you touch upon whether an organization with a good SIM implementation really needs to invest in EDR, especially where the budget is tight?
Right. And for clarity, this slide is just a reference for everyone as a takeaway. None of us are going to read this to you. I just thought it would be helpful to summarize things as a aid. But you want to take that one, Chris, first, or would you prefer me?
Yeah, no, I'm going to give my view on this one, right? I mean, so it's very much a what do you need, right? What do you want to be able to see, and what level of visibility do you want, and how far do you want to go with things like containment, right? And what's important to that organization. So very much a bottom line on that. Certainly my view on that one. And what can we do when we talked about those different types of platforms as well, right? So do we need to lean into a proprietary solution? Like, can we solve that problem with an open source solution? As an example.
As I think about it as well, obviously there is proven ability to bring a lower cost option to the market with just an EDR only component. We talked about that as MEDR, right? It's certainly possible. As you move to larger enterprises, things like compliance are terribly important, and generally you're not going to be able to achieve, compliance categories, and it becomes more difficult to do a number of activities without a SIM as it would. There's just too many different things that plays into. So it's common in my experience. Most large enterprises have a SIM of some flavor existing.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. So maybe more of a general question. What advice do you have for organizations about to embark on that migration process, replacing legacy while maintaining business continuity? We are actually going to also talk about this in the next session, but I'd like to get, based on what we've discussed today, get your opinions.
Yeah, my strong opinion is that in those scenarios, generally you're talking about an entity that's invested an enormous amount into their detection rules and their response actions. To think that you're going to do a migration over the weekend and flip a switch and you're going to go from one to the other is, shall we say, naive, to say the least. So having the capability to do this, a dual run capability whereby you can take that intellectual property of investment and detection rules in, say, one platform, and then go ahead and test and prove out that it actually works in the other platform, and go through a migration strategy. It might not sound particularly fancy, but these are operations things, and it goes back to the basics. And I often say looking at the specific use case in detail is important. And as Chris said, right, if you can't document it, you're not going to be able to automate it. So these are important. Chris, maybe you want to add to that?
We share a common view here, right? Yeah, we certainly do.
Okay. All right. So I think we're pretty much we're going to wrap this session up. I really appreciate both of your time. I know that time is very precious, and it was great having you in the SOC Masterclass. And so we're gonna take a 9-minute break. So please stay with us if you can. And we're going to be going into our next session, managing the transition to the native cloud security. And we're going to be looking at some of the challenges and opportunities around that topic. So thank you for joining us, Jason and Chris, and have a good rest of your day. If you could, I'm going to ask you to stop sharing so that I can just pull up the next session. And in the meantime, we'll take, like I said, a few minutes of a break, and we'll start again at the top of the hour. So thank you.